Welcome to our business track of the Data Science Salon YouTube channel. We have Tim Yu, Senior Director of Head of Analytics at Roku. The content acquisition lifecycle is complex and multifaceted. Streaming services that strive to be both competitive service and meaningful source of entertainment to consumers need to effectively value content as well as understand the complex relationship between value to the company and to consumers. Discover how analytics and modeling can be used to navigate through the various stages of the content acquisition life cycle in this presentation. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Tim Yu, and I run the analytics organization at Roku. I'm here today to talk about how we use data to optimize the content acquisition process. As you know, Roku runs a free ad-supported streaming service called the Roku channel. The Roku channel needs to acquire and license tens of thousands of pieces of content for millions of users. This is a mind-boggling task and has many opportunities for error. Thankfully, we have tons of data that can be used intelligently to improve our acquisition efforts, not only for Roku, but also for our customers and our partners. But before we get there, I'd like to describe at a high level what the content acquisition process looks like. Here's what the cycle looks like. First, you'll want to set a content strategy where you might ask questions like, what do we want to be known for? What customers should we focus on? What content will attract and retain those customers? Now, once you've set a content strategy, then you go out and look for deals for content that fit that strategy. And when you do that, you might ask questions like, how much should I pay for this content? Do I believe this content will generate positive returns? Lastly, you get this new content into your service, and customers will begin to watch that content. You'll want to learn and ask, did the deal work? Did I achieve the results I wanted? What should we adjust moving forward? Now that I've described the process to you, let's walk through how Roku has used this process and has used data to gain insights and optimize the content acquisition cycle. First, we're going to talk about learning from the past. But before we do that, let me caveat that all the data in this presentation is merely for example purposes and are not actually a reflection of Roku's actual data or performance. The simplest approach to learn from the past is to look at how much each title costs and how much each title produced in revenue. It gives you an accurate reflection of the monetization that occurs while people are watching that specific content or that specific title. However, as we analyzed our data and conducted user studies and research, we could clearly see that the titles actually help us beyond just the direct monetization that occurs while watching that content. Content helps us to acquire new customers who might not have come to the Roku channel otherwise. It also helps us to engage existing consumers who might have otherwise churned out. It also does kind of everything in between. And so content is the key. But it produces what we call a halo effect. Right? A piece of content generates more value and more revenue than what is generated purely while watching that content. And each title probably does it differently. Right? So then the question becomes, are we capturing all of the value that these titles are bringing to us by just measuring revenue? And the answer is no. And if the answer is no, then you might have, say, for example, these three circled pieces of content who generated significant amounts of revenue, but they may have all brought in very different amounts of value or halo effects. So how do we validate that? Well, we use machine learning models to actually answer this question. To simplify for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to not talk about value abstractly, but we're just going to use time spent watching content as a proxy to that question. And the answer in the simplest terms is yes, these titles do indeed bring in additional value beyond just the time spent watching that specific content. For example, a movie might have acquired a new user who then goes on to watch a bunch of other content, or a movie might have inspired an existing customer to watch similar movies or movies with the same actors or in the same genre. It might have also prevented them from churning. Furthermore, in this example, we can actually see that each movie that we acquired, in fact, provided a very different number of incremental hours spent watching content other than that specific movie. For example, here we can see that movies 2, 5, and 6 provided way more incremental viewing time of other content than movies 1, 3, and 4. So what did we learn from our data? We actually learned that 1, halo effects do exist, and 2, that different movies and different types of movies generate different halo effects, which can then be used in our content strategy. Moving on, how do we use this data to create a content strategy? Meaning, how do we know what content we need to keep our consumers happy and engaged while also helping Roku as a business? At Roku, we have a very strong machine learning and AI team that built a recommendation engine for recommending content to the viewers of the Roku channel. And we can actually leverage this engine to better understand the content that we have, as well as the customers that we have. By leveraging the existing engine, we actually can ensure that our content and editorial strategy has synergies with the titles that our recommendations engine would actually recommend to our consumers. So using this recommendation engine as a starting point, we can perform a clustering algorithm on the representations of our content in that recommendation engine and see that there are clear clusters of recommended content. As an example, we might have a cluster of Western movies and a cluster of rom-coms. Next, we can actually run the same sort of clustering algorithms on the customers that we have using the representations that they have in our recommendations engine. And you might end up with customer segments like what we might call Western cowboys, who like to watch Westerns, or hopeless romantics who are very interested in rom-coms. Lastly, we can enrich the overlay of these clusterings with other information such as demographics, location, and customer lifetime value. What does this look like? Well, we can actually see that different clusterings of users that we have created have very different characteristics and exhibit very different behaviors. For example, and again, this is just for example purposes and is not an actual reflection of Roku data, but for example, you might find that one cluster is over-indexed on coastal regions, while another cluster is over-indexed in sort of the South and Midwest. We might also find that one cluster is far more engaged than another cluster. Here we see what we labeled as cluster 28 might spend 20 days in a month streaming and 101.2 hours in a month streaming, whereas what we label as cluster 12 might spend 2.8 days in a month streaming and 21.7 hours in a month streaming. Very different behaviors between these example clusters that we've created. And this is in fact what we find is that there are many segments of users who behave and look very differently. So how do we use this information? Make it simple to visualize. Let's first start with this table where the rows are the previous user clusters that we created that I walked you through. And the columns are those same content clusters that we created using the recommendation engine. And so, you might have customer segments 1 through 4, and you might have content segments like rom-coms, westerns, sci-fis, or a whole host of other content clusters. Then we can take this table and fill it in to see where our customer segments and content segments overlap. Okay? Which means basically you can see which clusters of content do each clusters of customers enjoy. In this example, you can see, for example, that customer segment 1 enjoys westerns, customer segment 2 enjoys rom-coms and sci-fis, customer segment 3 enjoys rom-coms, and customer segment 4 enjoys sci-fi. Next, we can then overlay where we have high or low content density and availability, represented by these movie reels at the top. So we can see that in this example, we have a high density of Western content, a low density of rom-coms, and a medium density of sci-fi movies. Knowing the content density then allows us to see how happy our consumers are with the available content on the Roku channel. For example, you might see that customer segment 1 really likes the Western content segment. And if we've got a lot of titles there, they're probably pretty happy. Customer segment 3 loves rom-coms. And, in this example, if you've got pretty low density of rom-coms available, they're probably not all that happy, right? Because the thing that they're most interested in is rom-coms, and we don't have very many of them. Lastly, we can overlay sort of user customer value or lifetime value on these segments. Understand which of these segments bring us the most value. And so in this example, customer segment 3, which is interested in rom-coms, and we have a low density of rom-coms, but is the highest value segment that we have. So what we know here now is that, well, we've got a segment that is relatively valuable to us and is probably not happy with our content library. So we can take this information and then we can go out and say what content we want to go after. Right? We've got our editorial and content strategy set, and we know what we want to go after. Then the question becomes, well, how much do we pay for the content that we want? Well, at Roku, again, we have tons of data, and we have the people and the processes and the methodologies to help answer this question. So we actually ended up using our data and machine learning to predict potential content performance. Now, first, we take data like our historical content consumption data and the information from the recommendation engines and the clusterings that we just saw. And we can also take non-Roku data like box office performance, and we plug all of these into a machine learning model to predict how much revenue that we expect from each piece of content in the deal. Well, the good news for us was that this process has proved to be quite valuable. It's been fairly accurate, has reduced a lot of the manual effort that was required in assessing all the deals out there, because now we could do it in an automated way using machine learning models. And we also improved accuracy. So what does this then allow us to do? Well, this allows us to go out and say for each title that we potentially want to get, say we have deals out there for movies 1, 2, 3, and 4, then we can assess each of those movies through this machine learning model, and we can see, does it achieve our desired ROI threshold or not? And then we can decide, okay, we do want to go out and get movies 1, but we don't want to get movies 2, 3. Where does that leave us? That leaves us with actually a reinforcing content acquisition cycle that is complete. We've learned from our past data. We learned how to most accurately assess the true and total value that content can bring us, what we earlier called the halo effects. We've used data and machine learning to cluster and segment our consumers as well as our content to better understand the content ecosystem within the Roku channel, and to create a holistic content strategy that benefits both our business, but also is successful at entertaining our customers. Lastly, we were able to take this content strategy and decide what pieces of content we want to go after in future deals. And using machine learning, we can actually predict which of these pieces of content will give us the ROI that we desire. And this process has actually worked really well for us. We've gotten excellent at driving maximum value because we have all this rich consumption data that helps this reinforcing cycle where we go out and get deals, we learn from those deals, we adjust from that and set new content strategy. And this process works so well that, in fact, that's why we have 175 partners coming to work with the Roku channel and get their content into the Roku channel. This now concludes my presentation on how we use data to inform our content strategy at Roku. Thank you.
That was a presentation by Tim Yu, Senior Director and Head of Analytics at Roku. He shared how analytics and modeling can be used to navigate through the various stages of the content acquisition lifecycle. If you enjoyed that presentation, you can subscribe to see more to our YouTube channel below. Thank you.